right, guys, here with Brian James of, we have a Charleston or a Lorna address?
Charleston
address. And he and I are actually neighbors. As a crow flies, it's probably like 3 miles from where I live to you live. And
in the country, that's like being next door.
Exactly. But now, are you on Facebook?
No.
Okay, so Brian is not part of the Structure U group, but that's okay. But I asked him to be on here because I've gotten to know him through going to church together and just out and about and different things we're part of. But I was like, there's a few things I appreciate about you. You're a man of God. You've been married now for how many years?
42.
42 years, and you're a great father. And you're super, super disciplined. And kind of in Structure U, we're about faith, family, fitness, and fun. And that's like everything that you're about. So I'm like, you want to be on this. And this is our first time in this actual studio. So this is my first time ever doing like one-on-one like this. So welcome.
Well, I am honored.
Awesome. Now, if you want to give us a little bit of background about yourself, where you come from, what you do. I think you're retired now, but what did you do for a living when you were working and stuff like that?
Well, I grew up south of Greenup on a farm, which really, my dad was gone a lot. I worked on road construction, was gone through the week many years. So that really kind of defined who I am as far as the work ethic and doing things on my own. You know, a lot of times there just wasn't anybody else to rely on, so I had to do things myself or figure it out myself. And kind of unfortunately, I mean, that's the way I still am today. I don't really like to rely on anybody else if I don't have to.
You are a real man, then. So isn't that what we're taught as men, to do things?
Well, unfortunately, that's not a real positive trait that we possess. But
how true is that?
Yes.
You know, I'm very, very fortunate that. Sorry to interrupt you, but having Carson, who's in the studio with us, said, you know, I want to help out. And I have feelings of guilt because I know that he's busy, and I don't want to ask him to come help because I'm like, I'm a man. I should be able to handle all this on my own. So I'm very, very appreciative for Carson over there because he is willing to help and do that. And he asked me today, he's like, I know that you're hesitant to ask me, but you can ask me anytime to help. And so I'm like, okay, great. I appreciate it. But, you know, being a man, we don't want to ask for that help. So,
absolutely.
So you grew up on a farm.
Grew up on a farm, graduated high school. I was going to, well, my wife and I went to high school together, and went to school at Eastern, worked as an apprentice plumber and electrician,
really?
And during all the way through college, and I also worked as, for my future mother-in-law, as a H&R Block income tax preparer.
Okay.
So got some experience there. Out of high school, I worked on road construction with my dad one summer. So a lot of different experiences at that time in my life. Got out of college, got hired at Illinois Consolidated. Worked there for a year. I'd interviewed at Donnelly. Donnelly called me a year later out of college and asked me to interview with them again, and I did. And I worked at Donnelly for 21 years.
Really?
Went on to the insurance industry, and worked for Country for about 2.5 years. And I was sitting at my desk. Well, actually, I went home for lunch one day and got a call if I would like to buy into a partnership down at Casey
Really?
As an owner of an insurance agency, which I did. That worked out pretty well, and I did that until 2019, whenever I retired. In the interim, in 2016, I just realized this morning my son has worked for Jimmy John's for 20 years now.
No kidding.
And he started in college. He went down to Tallahassee and was attending Florida State and went to work there. Interestingly enough, at one time, all three of the store managers at that location were from Charleston, Illinois.
No kidding.
Which is
really?
the original.
That is the original in Charleston,
Jimmy John's.
That's crazy. I did not know that.
Yep. So, in 2016, at the end of 2015, we purchased a couple of stores down in Tennessee, and my son operates those for us.
Really?
Today. So
that's awesome. So how much time do you have how much time a week do you put into running those stores? So you own them.
Yeah, obviously my son, the restaurant business is really brutal. If somebody's in the food industry, It's a tough gig because
Yeah.
of the hours that are involved and the labor and everything. So my son invests a lot of time. Um, I'm just really involved on the administrative side, so
Right.
probably about 20 to 30 hours a month on an ongoing basis. In January and February when I'm doing year end
Yeah.
and preparing all the various tax returns and business returns that I have to do. Right now, it's probably 100, 120 hours
Really?
in January and February.
Oh,
So
man.
kind of like a full-time job this time of year, but I don't have to go to the office anymore.
Yeah, you get to do it from home. Now, how long
Yes.
did you sell insurance total?
17 years.
And that's kind of a brutal industry. Because so I worked for Country Insurance for like almost 2 years, but I don't. Maybe it's just that company. But there, if you're not selling life insurance, then they'll start taking money out of your pocket.
Exactly.
And at the time for me, I was too young to be in that position because I was just super immature. Probably still way too mature for being 38. But I learned a lot. I mean, I was like, man, they start taking money out of the paycheck. I'm like, this isn't for me. So I quit with nothing else lined up. I'm like, I'm just done with this. But that can be very brutal if you have some quotas you have to make. Maybe it was probably different owning your own place.
Very different.
But you still, what you sell, you kill what you eat.
Right. But
Eat what you
one
kill.
of the things, I mean, my daughter likes to think that I'm an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
but I've been fairly conservative about it. I bought into an existing insurance agent, so there's an immediate cash flow there.
Yeah.
I bought into existing fast food restaurants. There was an immediate cash flow there. So it's way off topic, I think, for where we're.
No, I think it leads right into where I want to go.
But there's another piece of that,
Mhm.
and that is, you have to have the funds when you're looking at buying a business. I purchased my first home in 1981 at the height of the inflation and high interest rates.
Yeah.
My first home mortgage was 14.75%,
Oh man, that's crazy.
which is a pretty good incentive to pay it off early.
Yeah, for sure.
But so my wife and I paid it off in 5 years, our first home.
Awesome.
Now, you may own a vehicle that costs more than what our first home did. So
Yeah.
it's a little different world today. We built our own home where we live now about 9 years later, and I think we paid that off in about 7 years.
Dude, that's awesome.
And through it all, through that time, we were also contributing, or out of my paycheck, I was contributing to my 401k. And when we started building the house, I thought about, stopping that or reducing it, and I didn't. We went right on through it. So anyway, that's a whole nother discussion on finances at some point in time. But the house was paid off. I did another mortgage on the house to buy the insurance business. We paid that off. I did another mortgage on the house when we went to buy the restaurant franchises. So the home can be quite an asset to you, more than just. I mean, it's most people's most important or largest asset.
Yeah.
And the people that if I'd done it 30 years, I wouldn't have had the equity on the mortgage. So,
Very true.
So by paying it off early, I had the equity to
And I
finance
think
other opportunities that came along.
You make some great points because we live in a world today where, if you go to the car dealership, their question is, how long do you want to pay, or what do you want your payments to be? Like, so they're just trying to fit it in, and in this day and age we live, it's just, if I can make the payments, I can afford it. My wife and I, before we got married, we did the whole Dave Ramsey thing. And so when we got married, we did everything debt-free except for our home. But as we've gotten a little bit older, I've heard Dave Ramsey say it many times, like, I have the ability to out-earn my stupidity. Like, and so we've taken on a little bit of debt here and there, but it's nothing outrageous, I guess. But it's still, like, I know that we could be sitting in a different spot financially if I were more diligent with my money. But, I think, too, what you were talking about earlier, about being available for these opportunities or being around for when these opportunities arose, I think, too, probably like the way that you live your life. I don't think there's such thing as luck or coincidences any longer as I'm growing my faith, because I'm like, no, because, and like you were in a position where you could make all these things because with your religious or your spiritual background, you're a faithful man of God who understands, these things are happening for a reason. And when I'm obedient, God likes to bless me. And, and Carson and I were talking about that earlier, that, like with him with tithing, I wasn't ready for that at that point, but I'm learning now because my spiritual growth has only been like 3 years in the making. But the more I'm obedient, the more God blesses me with. I was just sharing a story recently with a guy that I called for dinner reservations at this place. And they're like, when do you want your reservations for? She kind of laughed at me. I'm like, Friday? And she kind of laughed again. She's like, people call and reserve spots here 4 and 5 weeks out. Let me go check. And she was just kind of like laughed at me. I'm like, oh, crap. So then she comes back and she's like, somebody just canceled. We have one open for 6 o'clock on Friday. Do you want that? And I'm like, yep. Well, I told my wife, I said, maybe ignorance is bliss as well a little bit. But like the more I'm growing my faith and being obedient to God, it's like whenever you and I have kids, if my kids are great, like I want to bless them. I feel like God's probably like that with us.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that, I don't profess for the abundance mentality or ministry. If you're a believer, then God's going to bless you immensely financial. That's not what His Word says. But I heard a message one time. I like to listen to a pastor down in Alabama. We visit the church from time to time when I see relatives. Ralph Sigler to Harvest Church in Dothan, Alabama.
Okay.
And he did this message, and he talked about. He told a story about blessings that somebody had went to heaven, and they go into this big room, and there's all these boxes with red ribbons and bows on them. And he said, "What's all this?" And his guide says, "These are all the blessings that God had ready for you that you never asked for." Scripture says, stand. If you ask, you will receive.
Yep.
And so I do believe that God blesses us in so many ways, but we also have to be walking that path and seeking those blessings as well.
Yep. And have you ever heard of the book, The Prayer of Jabez?
Yes.
I remember hearing that story in that book as well. The Prayer of Jabez was in that book, and I was like, when you mentioned, I was like, I've heard that story. So, and that's a great book. But going back to with your father being gone a lot, do you think that helped shape you as a man going through all that? Because I feel like you can either take maybe one or two turns of the road. Nowadays, it seems like, well, I heard a stat the other day that 9 million American kids go to bed every night without a father at home. And when I think about fatherhood with my own kids, I'm like, I can't imagine that. But your dad was working. I mean, it's not like he was out just doing what men do these days, just abandoning the family. But
right.
Do you think that helped shape you as to who you are today? Do you think there's any downfall to it?
I definitely think there's a downfall to it, and one of them is the independence, and another is that independence also probably carries forward to authority, or not wanting to heed to authority. If your dad's not around, then you don't have anybody really to answer to.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I had to answer to mom, but I think it had an impact in that way.
Dads are different. Just a father in general is different than a mom, I know that going with my mom growing up, and my mom was a disciplinarian, my dad wasn't necessarily, so it was just a different dynamic. But can you tell at your age now that there were, do you think about your childhood a lot or wanting to please your father? Because now, as I'm diving into a lot of this stuff, I'm realizing that the I don't want to say daddy issues or the father trauma is a real thing, but even in my own life, I'm understanding like we want to please our fathers, and now as I'm growing up, I'm like, man, it's crazy how that stuff works.
Yeah, my dad passed away in 1994, so he's been gone.
How old were you at the time?
I was 36.
36. So
he's been gone 28 years, and as I look back on it, he and my mom were married young. I was born out of wedlock, and which, we could talk about white privilege. I had a lot of white privilege growing up. But, as far as, when I look at my dad and I look at things that he did with his life, it's not the kind of thing that monuments are built on.
Yeah.
But the kind of person he was, he worked for the state at the end of his working career, And, you know, engineers would do a job estimate, and he would go out and he would find a way to do it differently, do it cheaper, and in less time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it never failed.
Yeah.
Every project that he took in, he was always, I mean, he could find a way of doing things easier. You know, he would get the torch out and bend his wrenches so that he could get in and work on equipment. You know, he dug potatoes once in a while with his backhoe.
Really? That's funny.
Just if there was a way to do things differently or easier, he did that. And when he passed, my minister came to see me, and he said, and I've said this to many people since then, what are the three things that you would like to continue on that were strengths of your dad? And
the pastor asked you that?
He asked me, you know, so that gave me something to think about. And one of them is that he was so loyal to friends.
Yeah.
And to people that worked for him. And I mean, during the wintertime, you know, he was unemployed during the winter, having worked on road construction, and we might drive an hour and a half, 2 hours away to go visit a friend during the wintertime.
No kidding.
And you know, he just he was inclusive with people. Had a great sense of humor. To my mom's chagrin, I mean, all somebody had to do was ask him for help on something, and he was gone.
Yeah.
I mean, he would help somebody else at the drop of a hat. In 1993, August of 1993, I had a friend come to the house that raised catfish in his lake. And the lake had turned over, and he didn't have any aerators, and he had lost 10,000 fish that were in baskets in his lake, and he needed those disposed of. And my dad's finishing up his chemo and, you know, not feeling real great. So my dad jumps on his backhoe, drives over a couple miles to the guy's house, and tells him, he said, you need to just disappear because this isn't going to be pretty.
Oh, man.
He said, so I'll get him buried for you. And I'm sure having, you know, going through chemo that it wasn't a pretty sight seeing him do that.
Yeah.
But that defined who he was.
That's awesome. That's a great story.
So
loyalty. I like that.
Yeah. So he passed away. This is another short story. I'll share the rest of it sometime. But he passed away at 2:20 a.m. on February 20th of 1994.
Really?
And I don't talk about this. I don't tell people about this. And here I am, you know, sharing it on a podcast. But since that time, every February 20th, I fast.
Do you?
And you know, it's to honor my dad and to thank God for the influence that he had on me.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I've been talking a lot about fasting recently and the importance of it, and I need to do more of it. So I mean, I think that's a great honor to your father that you do that.
It is very cleansing. I mean, during, you know, the day that you're doing it, you know, I worked through all those years, and you know, they're having, you know, platters of food at work for meetings and things. And like, man, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have water today.
And you know, I think that transitions perfectly into the next thing I would like to talk to you about, just discipline, because I know that. So you and I don't know if it's you and another guy, but the Saturday mornings at church, you guys have started a little. Do you call it Bible study? Men's breakfast, basically.
Men's breakfast and Bible study.
Yeah, and that's awesome. But during that, you shared that you've read, I don't know how many books a year, but for like the last 35 years, and you've kept track of them. And I'm like, this is one disciplined guy. Like, I want to talk to him more. So, so in Structure U, we're all about personally, like, structuring our lives. You know, do you have certain, like, morning routines that you do? Maybe not now that you're retired, but whenever you were working, did you have a certain routine that you kept in the mornings and maybe of an evening?
I did. When I was working, and it changed over time. I mean, I would try to do, you know, my scripture reading in the morning. When I turned 40, I think I told you this. When I turned 40, I was probably in the best shape of my life.
Yeah.
because I was working out every morning. Um, and I think in that one entire year I missed 10 days of working out.
No kidding. Oh, wow.
And I was doing stair stepper, Nordic track, elliptical, playing basketball, lifting weights, and I was in pretty good shape at that time.
Disciplined man.
Yeah. Um, so it was probably 1993. It was probably around the time that my dad was diagnosed with cancer that I attended a seminar for the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at things that have really been a significant influence on your life, that's one of them for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I attended that seminar. I had audios of the course. I listened to those probably 2 or 3 times. I read the book. I ended up being a counselor for doing those as we went through the workplace, presenting that to our management team.
That's awesome.
So I really embraced the concepts that are in that book. The 7th habit is the one that I can, probably discuss the most intelligently, as far as, it just comes down to looking after every aspect of your life through the physical, as far as your exercising and what you eat, the spiritual side of it, the mental health side, and just developing that discipline in your life.
Isn't that the truth?
And after we talked last weekend, I kind of sat down. It's like, okay, where do I put structure, or where do I have these disciplines in my life? And I guess what I found is over time they've evolved. I mean, there's quite a bit of structure there that I didn't realize that there was, as far as things that I do or things I rely on. Now every morning, I try to get my reading in, work on investments, and depending upon what the weather's like outside, once I finish that, I can either do business work, or head outside. I used to say I owned 12 acres where I live. That property owns me.
It's a lot to take care of.
I do vegetable gardening, perennial gardening. We have fruit trees and strawberries, blueberries, blackberries.
That's awesome.
And that's a consuming part of my life. And unfortunately, again, it's something that I could be doing other things, but when you have all those things, they don't wait. You have
true.
You have to take care of it.
And looking back on your working life, so in my own personal life, I feel like my wife is the same way. Our morning routine is almost non-negotiable, because if I get my morning routine in, and maybe you can attest to this, but if I wake up in a proactive state instead of waking up to that alarm, going and running and putting my pants on, going to get my car keys. But if I wake up proactively, where I'm not turning on the TV, I don't grab for my phone, but like you said, I will do a devotional. So I've got a core 4, so I'll do reading for 10 minutes. And these are all different times, but basically if I have an hour, I can do a cold shower, which if you're not doing cold showers, you need to get on that. A little bit of meditation, reading, some exercise, and journaling. And journaling has been very, very beneficial for me here over the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks of just different things going on in my life. But if I'm doing those 5 things, and also make my bed. If I make my bed, I don't know if you ever read that book called Make My Bed. I think it was on your list. But
yes.
Whenever I'm doing those 6 things, my life, for the rest of the day, it's almost like it's great, because I get a little prayer in there too, God just help guide me throughout the day. And if I'm doing that, like, my days typically go so much better if I've got that structure. So when you were working, do you notice, like, getting your exercise in the morning, getting your reading into that all help you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I wasn't, it just takes an edge off. You just
yes.
You get that rush. You get a high from it at that time, which I told you it's harder to do at my age now.
Yeah.
I don't get that. Although when I do my stretching, I do feel a lot better after I do that. But definitely sets the tone for the day. I mean, today, if I don't get that morning routine in, it's like it just throws everything out of whack.
Yes.
It's just like, I didn't do that.
And I know, like, as men, we go through seasons of life, but if I'm continually doing my morning routine consistently, everything else goes smooth. Have you ever heard of the book, or have you ever heard of Stephen Pressfield?
No.
He wrote a book called The War of Art, and what it talks a lot about the resistance, whether it's the devil or whatever your spiritual background is. But for me, every single morning, to get into that cold shower, there's some resistance there. So I take that head on every single morning. I just turn it on cold, and I do 2 minutes. So I set my timer, and I just hop in. But as soon as I feel that moment of resistance, I'm in there. And and the beneficial side of cold showers, there's so many different benefits from it that I'm almost 3 years every single day on those now. And we went and got a horse trough that we'll put ice in sometimes and do those in the summertime. But also at these Structure U events, we've had 2 of them with groups of, one had 7 and one had 8 guys. So we had this big pool that we filled up with ice. Last time we did it was 35 degrees, and everybody got in there at the same time and sat down for almost 4 minutes, I think. And so you talk about a bonding experience. For men, we probably don't bond enough. And during those retreats, we call it less fake, more real, because we have technology at our fingertips, or we can connect with people all over the world, but we don't dive into a one-on-one relationship very often. And I think that I like what you're doing with the men's morning breakfast. And we talked about doing some, or not we, but you talked about doing some accountability stuff through that mentoring program. And dude, I'm really, really excited for that, because I think more guys need that in their lives. So when you going to roll that out?
Well, hopefully within the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Really what we're talking about, what I've seen of you over the last, we probably just met, maybe 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Something like that.
And it was very sporadic.
Yes. But since that time, what you've done is you started to live your life intentionally.
Yes. It's my word of the year is intentional.
And I have communicated some things to one of my sons-in-law that, really talking about the school system and the education system. You can't rely on them to instill the values in your kids that you want. You have to be intentional about doing the things that are going to be true to what you want their principles to be, not what somebody else feels is important. Because in today's world, those are not going to align with what yours are.
Not going to align. And you make a great point. Living with intentionality. And so we first met, I think, at Toledo Church, and
Yes.
You and your wife hosted a little marriage thing. And I think I like talking about marriage because it's super important to me. But we went through that course, and there was only maybe 4 couples I think that were there, and my wife and I were the youngest by probably 20 years. But people think when you sign up for something like that, like, oh, new hearts must be having some problems. And I'm like, it's just like changing your oil, man. This is like preventative maintenance, And I know that my wife and I really enjoyed that. And so if you ever do something like that again, like, we're all in. But I think that marriage is a big priority of yours. And like, how do you put that, and maybe I should backtrack. If you have a list of priorities, where does marriage fall on your list of priorities? Because you need to come to church on Sunday with your list of priorities.
Absolutely. I would say, that's got, it's got to be in those top 5.
Yeah.
If I look back, I was thinking about this. I met my wife in high school. Checked all the boxes. We had common interest. We enjoyed being together. She was fun, and she was hot.
Mm-hmm.
And today she's still all those things.
Yep.
And so much more.
Does she think you're funny?
She does.
Dude, I think that's been the biggest key for me. My wife, if I get her laughing, like, the day can go pretty smooth.
And it's
because I'm none of those things, probably. Like, I know
I
that I'm
kind of
not
agree with
hot.
you. I'm not that funny, but she really thinks I am. So that's part of it. So I read this book for women. The title of the book was The Power of the Positive Wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember now who the author is of that. But as I read through that, I was like, my wife is all these things.
That's awesome.
And I gave her that feedback. I remember, working out at Donnelly, and I had an individual as a customer service rep, and he had some time management issues. He had a list, a to-do list that he would add to every day, and then the next day he would copy it over to the next page and start, and he never wrote anything off. And his wife was on him all the time.
Really?
And, you know, she'd start calling about 5 o'clock, you know, what time are you going to be home? And, you know, and that just made him tighten up and less productive. And, you know, my wife never did those things.
That's awesome.
You know, and, you know, the thing is, you know, I go back to those high school days, and, you know, I don't think there's too many of us at that age that say, okay, you know, we're going to, this is what I'm looking for in a wife as far as, you know,
Yeah.
42 years
For
from now, this
sure.
is what I want our marriage to look like. And, you know, we're going to do these things and these things and these things. And
How old were you guys when you got married?
she was 19. Yes, 19 going on 20, and I was 21.
That's awesome.
So, you know, you go through the years, and God just blessed us immensely, far beyond whatever I ever deserved.
Yeah.
And I made so many mistakes along the way, and that's one of the things where where I'm at today is that I want to share my learnings and the discipline that I have to help others. A friend of mine told her son many years ago, and I'm not sure if this was an original from her because I think I read it elsewhere, but she said, "There's not enough time in your life for you to have to make and experience every mistake on your own without learning from somebody else's mistakes." So, you know, I'm hoping that's some of the things that I can convey.
Yep.
You know, as we go forward. You know, I've still got some work to do on putting something together, but that's the vision that I have is to share that, and hopefully people can learn from it.
For sure. I think that's completely admirable because, you know, I'm one of these guys like, so I've had coaches in and out of my life for different things, but like you said, if I can pay if I'm at point A and I want to get to point B and I can pay somebody a little bit of money to help me get to B without going through all the experiences, like that's beneficial to me. You know, we went to some course, my wife and I once, and this lady's like, if my kids ever ask me for advice, I never tell them the answer. I never give them any advice. She's like, they got to learn it on their own. And I'm like, you're kind of the worst mother ever. I'm like, I always want to be able to help my kids. I want them to learn, but also, like, you don't have to learn the hard way like we did. Like, if I can help you out along the way, let me help you out.
Well, that's good for your wife, you know, if you take that approach with your wife, because she's not wanting your opinion anyway. She just wants you to listen. She doesn't want you to solve it for her.
Bingo.
But with the kids, you know, they need some guidance. And what I've seen, I mean, it's amazing with the 1-year-old, the 18-month-old, or 2-year-olds that, you know, I've got 7.5 grandchildren now. And it's amazing how they can respond to the discipline.
Did you say 7.5 grandchildren?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the half one?
The half one is still in the womb at this point.
Oh, okay. I was like 7.5. That's awesome.
Yep, due in April.
But, you know, I think marriage is super, super important to me, just because it is. But also, so my wife's been going through this coaching course, and we got to watch this one part together, and it was talking about how husbands should care for their wives. Maybe not necessarily care, but it said men struggle with, I'm sorry, let me backtrack. A woman wants to feel safe, she wants to feel heard, and she wants to feel, safe, heard, and maybe seen. So, you know, now I can come into the house and be like, hey, I want you to know I see you and you look great. You know, in we did the love languages, and her love language is words of affirmation. So if I'm just telling her these things, I'm hitting all the right buttons. I'm like, life is good. We're a team, so we do things, but I know, like, I don't have to. It used to be, I thought I had to hit every single love language. I thought she was bipolar. And I thought, I have to do the laundry. I have to get her gifts. I have to do all these things. But once I learned it's words of affirmation, my life's been so much easier. And, you know, and one time, I don't know how I ever topped this, but so I started an appreciation journal for her. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I did for a solid, 3 months. Every single day I would write something I appreciated about her. And then we went on a little weekend getaway, and I gave it to her. And she's, you know, as soon as I gave it to her, she cried the whole time. And it was the best trip ever. But I'm like, now it's been 2 years. I'm like, how do I ever top that one? You know, but I always have to keep trying because, you know, and I think that's the fun part about marriage, especially if you're an intentional husband. Like, we want to, you know, I think a lot of us guys, maybe not us guys, but guys will take that context out of the Bible. Like, women should just submit to their husbands. Well, yeah, but how are you loving your wife? Are you loving her properly or not? Because I used to say, well, my wife should submit to me, because I'm the husband. But how am I treating her?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't treating her the best.
My philosophy on that is very simple. Treat her like the queen of the castle, and you'll be the king of the castle.
And isn't that the truth?
And if she's your princess and you treat her accordingly, it's worth it.
And you know what's cool about that course my wife's going through is that she came back and she said, hey, I want to let you know that I haven't been the best wife because I'm not hitting these points that would make you feel like the king, So now that she's doing those things, it's like I can it's kind of a dumb story, but the other day she made spaghetti and I'm like, and I don't know which is which, but I'm like, is this Prego? And she's like, no, it's ragu. I'm like, I love ragu. And she's like, I know. And I'm like, I really appreciate that because she likes the other kind. I'm like, you make me feel like the king right now because you made this spaghetti special for me. It's just something little like that that can make you feel good.
I think it's important to to have the romance, to have the surprises,
Yep.
For each other, and not just get into the rut. On my wife's 55th birthday, she's gotten a habit since both of our daughters are out in Utah of spending her birthdays with them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what's up with that?
Yeah.
So the day before her 55th birthday, I took her to the airport and dropped her off. And then her sister lives in Edwardsville. So I just dropped her off the airport and went to spend the night with her sister in Edwardsville. And then the next morning I caught a plane and I was in Chicago catching a connecting flight there. And I called my oldest daughter in Utah and I said, I need you to pick me up at the airport.
No, that's awesome.
She said, Dad, where are you? And I said, I'm in Chicago. I said, and headed to Salt Lake City. She said, you're so awesome.
That's great. Especially, how long have you been married at that point?
32, 33
That's
years.
awesome. Now, did you ever find
Well, I haven't finished the story yet.
Oh, even better. I like
it
this.
gets even better. So they keep me in hiding all day long, and they're going to Benihana's in Salt Lake City for dinner. So I get there,
yes.
and I'm hiding around the corner, as they're waiting outside, and then they go in and get seated. And I go in through the restaurant, and I actually walk through the kitchen to get to the table, and they're in the back corner. And Elisa's occupied looking at somebody else, and they're talking to somebody else, and one of the sons-in-law, they weren't married yet, and he had never met me, but he turns to my daughter and he says, "Isn't that your dad?" As I'm walking that way. So I come around the table, and I start kissing on my wife's neck, and that was how
Oh,
how she
that's
knew I was there
awesome.
for her 55th birthday.
That probably made the birthday awesome. Now, that's a great
hard
story.
to top.
Yeah, it is. Good for
But
you.
it was a good surprise.
That's awesome. Did you think that whenever you were raising your kids, were you ever putting your kids before your marriage? Were you still making time for having date nights, and was that ever a struggle?
That was a struggle.
Was it?
And that was the date nights are a good thing to keep that marriage refreshed. Fortunately, she's always worked part-time, so that it takes some of the pressure off, because when both spouses are working full-time,
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's difficult to find the time for the family, let alone for each other. So talking about the kids, I had a guy call me. He was a marketing rep, when I was in insurance, and he said, everybody that I talk to, he said, I'm getting ready to have my first child, and I'm asking everybody that I talk to for one piece of advice. And I said, well, that's easy for me. And I said, I got this from Life on the Edge by Dr. James Dobson, and I learned it too late. Type A personality, firstborn child was a son.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty tough on that firstborn with the Type A personality. But the thing that I picked up, albeit too late, and this is one of the things that I've shared with lots of people since, is that discern between when your child is being a child and when they're being willfully disobedient. Because that's crucial. And there were times when I didn't let my son be be a child.
And that's really good to hear, because now with my children at their ages, that's the thing. Like sometimes I'm like, am I? So my first two are daughters, and they're just super good kids. But that third one was a son, and sometimes I'd ask myself, like, am I being too hard on him? Is he just being a kid here? Like I have to really discern that, because it's like that's important. Because I feel like this day and age, kids probably grow up way too fast. Maybe. Maybe they're also growing up way too slow because of.
I think they grow up too fast.
I think so. Because
And I think the longer and studies show that, I think the longer that you can protect them, because I've had people say, you can't protect them forever. They need to be exposed to these things. No, they don't.
Yeah.
They need to develop. They need to be a kid.
100% agree, because nowadays with all the technology, they can find whatever they want at their fingertips. And it's like, yeah, I want to protect mine as long as I can, but also, I don't want them to be ignorant to the real world, but also like they're not going to be ignorant. Like you said, being intentional, like with your education and stuff like that. We got the opportunity to send our kids to a different school, a Christian school, where they are learning different things than at a normal public school. And it's like, maybe they're getting sheltered a little bit, but also, like my first graders writing in cursive like better than I know how to write in cursive. I'm like, they're learning so much.
They don't even teach cursive in the public school.
I asked the teacher, I'm like, what's the point of this? She's like, well, it's part of the curriculum. We're learning that. But also, what they do on Friday? So today's Friday. Here's the cool thing about this school. That we went and met with the principal when we first were thinking about it. He's like, we only go to school till noon on Fridays because who wants to go to school all day on Friday? And I'm like, I like this place. But what else? On Sundays or on Fridays, all they do is chapel. So they go to chapel. My third grader is praying for 20, 30 minutes with a seventh grader. My first grader is praying that same time with like a fifth grader. I'm like, dude, that is so awesome. And I shared this the other day at church, but my first grader, she came home, and as we're praying at night, she says, when she in her prayer, she's like, I pray that I'm less like myself and more like you, God, and I want to, just do these things. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, this is awesome. But it goes into the thing of garbage in, garbage out. What are we feeding our minds with? And because I think it's so easy to not be reading books, to watching garbage on TV. There's so many garbage podcasts, and I'm guilty of. I used to listen to all those, and then I would go home, and the way I talk to my wife, the way I would talk to my kids, I'm like, this isn't, like you said. I became intentional about being a real man, I guess.
Well, this goes counterculture, but there's a quote several years ago that said that if you leave your mind sufficiently open, people will fill it with rubbish.
Isn't that the truth?
So again, if you're not being intentional about what you're doing with your time, then something will fill the void.
Something's going to fill it. And the devil's not scared to creep in there and take those thoughts.
Absolutely.
And share it with something else.
Another thing with the kids is as my kids got older, and you're not quite there yet, but I remember specifically with my daughters that, when they first started, with their driver's license, I was firm in the guidelines as far as the curfew. And as time went on, it became kind of a negotiation and a discussion. And, I was always going to have the final say on it, but
yeah.
they felt like they had some input into it. All right, so you're telling me you'll be home by midnight? Yes. So my daughter calls me one night. She said, we're going out to Cassie's house, and we're gonna watch a movie out there. I'll be home about 2:00. I said, what time did you tell me you were going to be home? Midnight. I said, see you then. It was her guideline.
Yeah.
Not my hard line.
I like that.
And there's a song going back several years ago. I think the name of it was "There's a Line I Will Not Cross" by Susan Ashton, and it talks about where is that line in the sand? Is it you think about where does the water meet the sand? When does the daylight meet the darkness? That's kind of a fuzzy thing there. So if you're thinking about things in advance, for example, somebody's going on a date, how far are you willing to go on the first date or a second date or a date period?
Yeah.
So if you've discussed, if you've thought about those things, or substitute anything else, as far as how far are you willing to go on something, or what are you not willing to do. If you've thought about that, it's a lot easier to make that decision. I did something in a high school class that probably wasn't wise then, and would be totally taboo today. But so I'm teaching this high school class, and we're talking about sexual relations. And I had a 357 King Cobra Colt with about a 6 or 7 inch barrel on it.
Yeah.
And I take this into the classroom in the church.
Try that now.
And I've got one bullet, and I said, "How many of you ever heard of Russian roulette?" And of course they all had. And I said, "Okay, that's one bullet. Okay, and you're probably not willing to put the gun up to the head with one bullet in there." I said, "Studies indicate that, you know, you have a 1 in 3 chance of having, if you're having premarital sex, you have a 33% chance of having some type of STD or getting pregnant, not to mention all the other baggage that goes along with it. So let's put another bullet in that gun and let's spin it. Now, who wants to play that game?" And, you know, I never heard any feedback from parents, but I think that was a lesson that stuck with the kids.
Man, I bet that's crazy.
I mean, that was pretty graphic, and not, like I say, probably not wise to do at the time. And
yeah, I'd like to see you try that these days. See what would happen.
Yeah,
that's crazy. That's funny. You know, and I think that talking about just relationships with our spouse, I was sharing this earlier with somebody that I've been doing a lot of. I love personal development. I love reading. I love even just taking courses and meditating, anything basically that's going to help me out, physical exercise. But my wife calls me the other day, and I could tell she was upset. And she's like, "I just feel like you've got a lot of stuff, 3 days a week are just all about you." And I was like, "Eh." And so, initially I get defensive. My ego gets in the way, and I'm like, but as we're on the phone, I'm like, "Mike, just relax." So 5 minutes went by on this phone call. She talked for like the first 30 seconds to let me know how she felt. 4.5 minutes, nobody said a word. And she's like, "Are you still there?" I'm like, "I'm still here." And she's like, "Well, that's how I'm feeling." I said, "Okay, I'm sorry about that." And then we hung up. And because initially I want to get upset. And so I think about it. So I send her a text message. I'm like, our marriage means more to me than anything. If I need to cut some stuff back, I'm more than happy to do that. Let's talk about this later tonight. And so she gets home. We didn't really talk about it. It's still kind of strenuous that night. But the next day, she comes in from her morning routine, and she's like, "Did you get your letter?" I was like, She's like, "I left a letter on your desk." And I went over there and read it, and it was her apologizing. She was just having a bad day, and I was the goat. And I'm like, our marriage just came a long way because initially I wanted to get defensive with you and say it was because it was my ego that wanted to get mad at you. And then here you are now backtracking and saying, "Hey, I was having a bad day." So I'm like, our marriage is getting better all the time. But also, once we all mapped it all out, I'm actually not being super selfish. It's certain times where our schedules differ. So she's maybe got to pick up the kids at different times, and I'm doing things. So she's like, "It's not like you're going out to the tavern, drinking beer. You're not just hanging out with your buddies all the time. The people you are hanging out with are good people that have the same interests." And I was like, man. And at that point, I got to give glory to God because I'm like, because talking about, premarital sex, my wife and I should be a statistic on the divorce side many years ago. We've been married for almost 10 years, but we were living together before we were married, premarital sex, out partying, just doing worldly things. And then, I don't know, maybe it was through prayer from both of us probably, saying we are not happy. Something's got to give. And then next thing you know, we're aligned, like we put him number one, and our marriage now and our just lives have just kind of, I don't want to say skyrocketed, but it's going good. It's going really good. And, and like you said about God's not the abundant lifestyle or it's not all about the money. Completely agree. Another quick little story. So I do some meditation. I do a guided meditation of a morning. And this one I was doing was just talking about your future and how do you see yourself in the future. And we really want to get out from where we're living and get closer to the school. And so I was just walking through this house that I'd like to live in. And so after I got done with this, I just had this great feeling, a peaceful feeling. And as I'm driving the girls to school, I'm just kind of looking out in the countryside thinking, I think God's, sooner or later, he's going to bless us with something. Later that day, I find a house on Realtor.com that just come up for sale. So I texted to my wife, and I'm like, it's not our dream home, but at least it gets us closer. So at 2:07, I text her, and I said, what do you think about this place? She's like, I live there. Let's go look at it. So I text the realtor, and she's like, let's go look at it tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I'm like, perfect. I leave to go pick up our girls at 2:33, so less than 30 minutes, a guy texts me and says, hey, we came and looked at your house randomly over the summer, and we weren't interested in it, but our circumstances have changed, and we would really like to buy your house now. And I was like, that's not, like, I couldn't even have written this up, you know? And so we went and looked at the house. It's not what we want. However, the realtor goes, there's another house that's coming on the market that's going to actually fit you guys way better. And we went and looked at that, and we're like, that's the one. But, you know, it's still a timing thing. So they've got to sell theirs first. But now it's like all this stuff just happened in the last, like, 48 hours. I'm like, you couldn't even make this stuff up. You know, got to give God the glory on that one. But it was within 30 minutes, all that stuff happened. Haven't talked to that guy.
You have to be patient.
Patience. And I haven't talked to that guy. I'd only talked to him twice. He called and said, can we come look at your house? We might want to buy it. I'm like, didn't even know that it was for sale, but sure, I'll sell it. And then they weren't interested in it. And then that was in September, and I just randomly hear from him out of the blue. Said, we're interested in this. I'm like,
Yeah.
But patience.
Perseverance goes a long ways.
Perseverance.
James chapter 1. A few years ago, I memorized James chapter 1 as I was driving to work each morning.
Really? That's awesome.
And actually, I wrote it on the index cards, and I'd have a verse every day, and I would just add to it. So the first 10 or 12 verses really stuck with me because I was reciting those to myself every day.
Every day, yeah.
So consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing your faith develops perseverance. So,
and you know, I love that because the more obedient we're becoming, the more God is saying, I see what you guys are doing down there. You know, and it's not like we all have goals and dreams, but also, like you said, patience. We live in a society now where we want everything we want right now.
Right.
But
there's also times when you're going to come under attack for your belief. The more you step forward, the more you step out. You know, with you doing this podcast, you know, I'm sure if there hasn't been, there will come a time when you come under attack. There's something that you'll see. I know this is not coming from. This is coming from earthly things. This is coming from Satan.
And it's happened really hard 3 or 4 times. And I truly believe when I took 4 or 5, 6 months off, it was because of maybe my lack of belief, because I was getting hammered, and then I stopped believing almost in myself, and that was hard, you know. And I'm not going to share the attacks, but like they were just so crazy, and I believed those stories too. That's the dumb part, was that I believed them. Somehow the devil worked his way in there, and he's like, yeah, you should
Mark
believe these things.
9:24. That says Jesus has just done a healing, and or he says, you know, if you can, you know, please do this. And Jesus says, what do you mean if I can't?
Yeah.
And the guy, he said, you know, if you believe, this can be done. And the guy says, I do believe, help me with my unbelief. And, you know, that's something that we all struggle with from time to time.
Yep. And I think that I'm really big into this book, Jim Rohn's, The Seasons of Life, you know. So we go through different seasons, it's, you know. But also I think sometimes when you're in a season, you're almost mentally think, I'm going to be here forever. You know, I have to keep telling myself, this is just a season. This is just a season. It's all going to come to pass.
Most of the things that we worry about never come to pass.
Never come to pass.
And they're never as bad as what we thought they were going to be. And we
never are.
And probably 90% of those things, you know, 2 weeks later, we can't remember what we were worried about to begin with.
And you've probably heard this too, that someone told me recently, like if you have a box and you're worried about something, put it in that box. And then and give it to Jesus and say, or God, and say, here's my worries. Like, I'm not going to waste my time worrying about them. But like, if you continue going back to that thought, go ahead and pull that thought out and say, God, I know that you can't handle this, so I'm going to go ahead and worry about this. And I heard that, and I was like, man, that's pretty powerful, because who's going to take that out of there? Just let it go.
Yeah,
you know?
There's a saying, you know, if it's worth worrying about, it's worth praying about. You know, and
not the truth.
You know, a time or two, my wife has, you know, expressed she's not a worrier at all.
Really? That's awesome.
But a time or two, you know, she's expressed, you know, being worried about something. I said, so have you prayed about it? no. I said, well, probably be a good idea.
Yep. That's awesome. Well, Brian, I tell you what, we could probably talk for 3 more hours.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to do this again sometime. But I appreciate you taking the time to come hang out with us. And, one of the things you said recently, and I've heard this a million times, but you said it the other day, and, I think it just speaks to your leadership level of what's going to be the difference between where we're at right now and 5 years from now. I'm going to let you tell it because I know that you know the answer.
Yeah, we're the same person today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, except for the people that we meet and the books that we read.
That's true. And I know that you've got a passion for reading books, and you made a list. I'm plowing through that list now because I love it. So, whenever we do the podcast, I'll share some information, your email address, so if people want to get a hold of you and ask you some questions, they can, since you're not on Facebook, which good for you for not being. So, but Brian, I appreciate it, and I'll look forward to doing this again for sure.
Okay. Enjoyed
Awesome.
it, Mike, and I knew I would.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
Take care.